and it wasn't just standing playing your guitar, it was like, you know, putting everything into it as well. Rory would throw songs in like Rain by the Beatles, which isn't the easiest song in the world to play. It was just per chance you've heard it before, you know. You just start playing it. Away you go. Or a Bird song, or a Bob Dylan song, or you know. And even in later years, I mean, he'd throw a song in like Sinner Boy, which I hadn't played since 1972. This is like 1989. All let's do Sinner Boy. But Rory, how does it start again? You know, don't worry about it. You get it. You know, I mean, but that kept it alive as well. You know, I mean, that kept the spirit of the thing alive. You know, because you're on the edge, you're dangling. What you going to do next? You know, you turn around and give you a wink and go, here you go, off again.
Rory Gallagher travelled with his band. He never forgot his fans back home in Ireland, and particularly in Belfast, which by the 70s had been ravaged by the Troubles. Gallagher's concerts here at the Ulster Hall were undoubtedly the highlight of each year for hundreds of music fans, not only because they were good, but also because basically they were the only show in town. For as virtually every other major artist ran scared of performing here, Rory Gallagher stayed faithful to his followers.
I mean, it was great that Rory came back and played every Christmas here, and it was like something to look forward to for a lot of people. And I love the fact that Rory didn't desert us. Well, there was a lot of bands wouldn't come, and Van Morrison in particular stayed well away from Belfast. It was years and years before he came back, but Rory did come back. He made the effort to come back here, and I always knew that he would get a warm welcome.
He put the bottle to his lips and said, "Rory, that's the best whiskey I've ever had." I went 91%, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96. Come on, baby. Woo! Yeah. I said, "Hey, bartender, can you hear me?" I said, "Hey, bartender, can you hear me?" I said 100%, I said 100%, and I want freedom, no pain at all.
Rory felt that it was Belfast that accepted his music first. He played in a show band in Cork, then he came to Belfast, he formed Taste, he found a place that could appreciate his music. And this was really, while his home may have been Cork and his birthplace may have been Donegal, the birthplace of his music was Belfast.
It's impossible to overstate the influence which Rory had at the time on aspiring young Irish musicians, including Adam Clayton of U2 and Lisburn's Vivian Campbell, now playing guitar with Def Leppard.
Rory was one of the first shows I ever saw when he played the Ulster Hall, because, you know, he was one of the few acts who would ever come to Ulster to play. He'd play every Christmas, and I think it was my cousin turned me on to Rory. I went down there and was just blown away. I was amazed, you know, in awe. And still to this day, he's like one of my biggest guitar heroes. And I got to meet him after the show, shook his hand. Because I've met like Eddie Van Halen and Jeff Beck and all those guys, which are, you know, guitar players I really admire, and I'm always in awe when I meet them. But nothing compared to meeting Rory, you know, because he was like my childhood hero. And the better Strat, I got to play his guitar for about 20 minutes in his dressing room, and that was it. You know, that was a moment to cherish. So it was a big deal for me, stupid as it may seem.
That period of the 70s, I felt it was very raw, and it was tremendously powerful. You know, some of the things that he was doing with his guitar then were really kind of taken further in the 80s by, you know, Eddie Van Halen, maybe, where Rory was hitting those harmonics within his playing, and he always had a tough, raunchy sound. He did have keyboards for some of that period, and then he later dropped them again. And I think he always worked better as a kind of three-piece powerhouse.
He was probably the first Irish, Taste was probably the first Irish rock band I ever saw in the stadium. And I do remember, like, probably 1,000 kids here in Dublin coming out of the stadium, talking to my mates. I was studying sheet metalwork. I just started this, and we were going to form a trio. And that was the first time, as an Irish person, I ever felt that I could do something that would be as good as the Anglo-American blues rock singers that I admired at the time. So I think the fact that he empowered people at that point, mine Taste and Skid Row, made people realize we can create this music ourselves.
I saw him on that tour in either 74 or 75, and again I just thought this was a guy who was kind of playing the blues, although he was from Ireland, and that, I suppose, gave me a vision of looking at the musical contribution in Ireland as being outside of necessarily the Irish scene, the kind of more international base of it. And I think, you know, Rory always had a way of, outside of the Irish context, connecting with the blues in the American traditions. And I guess that must have been the chord that it struck in me.
Have myself a ball above the Mason-Dixon line. Right on. Louisiana Red, right on. Gotta ride on to your freedom. In those northern states, your home. Right on.
Rory made it all look so easy, but it was sheer hell at times for the painfully shy man off stage to become the supremely confident performer on it.
The transformation from him getting from that stage onto the on-stage situation was very traumatic. He was getting very nervous and, you know, reserved. And then when he hit the stage, it was like World War III. It was this wild, lion, majestic, great guitar player, you know. If you didn't feel good going on, by the third, fourth bar, you felt good because you were up there, you know.
By the late 80s and into the 90s, Rory's profile had dipped. Rumours were rife about his health, and fears were fuelled by photos of him at the time. Friends said he was plagued with illness and self-doubts, but he angrily denied reports which claimed he was drinking too much and that he was washed up. Guitarist Gary Moore said recently that he found Rory a lonely man in his later years, but he was still playing from time to time, mostly in Europe, and he was planning new albums, although without his longtime sidemen who'd quit his band.
I think having played the way he played for so long, and as many gigs as he played every year, and I think the nature of the music business on his level, whereas they don't want you to move without a product out and all of that, and it's very hard going round and round and round, playing and playing. And sometimes I looked at him, I thought he was just a bit despondent, you know, he was a bit distant from the thing.
He was his own man. I mean, if Rory didn't want help, he wouldn't take help, you know. I mean, he was a very strong character, very strong character. And, you know, I mean, people were trying to extend help, you know, but he wouldn't have it.
Despite his own problems, however, Rory was still anxious to help other musicians. Keith Donald, who played with Moving Hearts, recalls how he stunned the band in France after an English tour they'd been planning collapsed.
After the concert, I went into the caravan backstage to collect our fee from Donald and Rory. We had a chat for a while, and then they gave me an envelope and said, there's a few bob extra in that because we heard of your bad luck with that circuit in England. And when I opened it afterwards, they had nearly doubled the fee. Nobody had asked them to, they didn't have to, and that kind of thing is rare in any business, so I was quite overwhelmed.
That says a lot about Rory, too.
Well, I think Rory was the kind of person who put music and people first and profit a poor third.
Rory also guested on albums in the 90s by Energy Orchard from Belfast and by the Dubliners.
He came to Dublin to do a concert, and I went along to see the concert, and he asked me to go up on stage with him and sing the song we had recorded with him. So I did, and that was one of the high points of my life. It really was fantastic. He was the quietest and gentlest man, you know, that I've ever met, practically, and he was so unassuming, genuinely unassuming. He didn't have this overconfidence that the mediocre have. He had the quiet, unassuming way that the great have, you know, and he was one of the greats.
One of Rory's last recordings was at the start of 1995, again as a guest, on an album by up-and-coming Dublin blues musician Samuel Eddy.
The part I'll never forget is you got this incredibly shy, almost even nervous man. And then all of a sudden when he went into the studio and Tom, his longtime roadie, had all the amplification set up for him, his guitars and all, he puts on the guitar strap and then bang, this other person almost, you know, it was almost, for me, I'd never seen anything like that before. We knew then that it was a master at work.
Dublin, June 1995, and Keith Donald plays his mournful blues for Rory in the wake of his friend's death. Rory had been admitted to hospital in London 8 weeks earlier with liver failure. He had a successful transplant, but a chest infection set in, and Rory died with his mother Monica and brother Donald, who'd also been his manager, by his bedside.
It was a real shock, but it was something in the back of your mind, sort of almost broke the fall, because, you know, he was such a free spirit, and he, as we said before, he believed in the blues, and he devoted his whole life to that. And maybe, like you said, he wasn't gigging so much anymore. I don't know whether he concluded his life in his career or not. You know, you get that feeling that he concluded it, and that maybe he felt it was time, I don't know.
I feel gifted that I was the one told, hey, you play the drums with this guy. It's a one-off in any musician's life. I mean, I always held a sort of a dream that we would actually play together again. Just prior to his death, I'd written him a few letters, and in it I'd said, you know, that, you know, we should play together again. Even if it's just for fun, just to come over here and hang out for a while and play.
And the last time I talked with him, I mean, it's poignant now because I know that's something we were talking about, where he says to me on tape, there's no glory in dying young, no matter how great a musician that makes you. You know, I mean, that's more poignant now than... But at the time, it gave me a sense of hope. I thought he was going to get on top of everything again. And I had this vision of him, you know, mixing the blues with his Irish bass, going back to that, maybe doing gigs, I don't know, Sinead, the Chieftains, U2, some kind of concert that would tap into every element of Irish music. And I really had this idea that when he hit 50, that's what we'd see him doing, because at 50 he would have been only a kid in relation to blues musicians. So that had been my hope, from which unfortunately it now won't happen.
In Dublin, a book of condolences was opened in Temple Bar by Keith Donald's music-based organisation.
I've been quite amazed by it, because a large number of people have rung us from outside of Dublin, and I've made a special journey to come up to Dublin to sign the book and then go back home again. I was kind of aware of a lot of people in the music business, people I'd know who either knew Rory or knew his music and respected him and his music, but I wasn't aware of the strength of feeling amongst Joe and Josephine public.
In his last session for UTV in 1994, Rory Gallagher left his own evocative epitaph, showing how different strands of